Retro or Die.
So tonight I thought it would be a good idea to make a top list of games that I would like to see overhauled. Now, everyone has the memories and the nostalgia for retro video games. Obviously, you can see all the stuff behind me and other shots that you've ever seen of my office before. Nostalgia plays a pretty huge factor into everything that I collect. Now, what I have noticed though is when I get the urge to play games that I loved from my childhood, I'm hit with a rude awakening of seeing how these games have not aged well. And because now that there's all these things that are coming out that are being rebooted, or I guess rebuilt from the ground up to make the game be able to stand the test of time, I thought it would be a good time to make a list of the top 5 games that I would like to see rebuilt from the ground up. Now, this means rebuilt from the ground up, not as an actual reboot, not changing the game at all, not changing the mechanics of the game, the story of the game, or what made the game great. I just mean overhaul to the point where they bring it to the modern age, put the old game within the new engine of the games that we have today to make them playable and actually stand the test of time for another 20, 30 years or so. I'll just get this out of the way early on my list, and they were the top picks on my list for a while, but they're already being redone. Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3. Resident Evil 2 for sure is coming out rebuilt from the ground up to make sure it's playable again. Now, I'm hoping there's lots of speculation saying that the game might be changed in some factors. They might add or take away some things, which I hope is not true, or only giving us this Resident Evil 4 over-the-shoulder technique. I hope that doesn't happen. What I'm hoping, and I have faith that they're going to do, is what they did with Resident Evil, the first game, and Resident Evil 0. And hopefully they'll keep continuing on with 3 and Code Veronica X. Number 5 on the list would be Gex, or Gex 3. The Gex series is a comedic platformer set in the fantasy world of a gecko that's trying to destroy this robot that's trying to destroy the world. The game has comedy, the game has some fun platforming, and the game has very creative levels, which make it replayable today, but when you look at it, you can tell it's dated. And I'm not as forgiving about clunky controls as I would have been, at 10 years old. Number 4 on the list would be Dino Crisis 2. The Dino Crisis series is made in the spirit of Resident Evil, also done by Capcom. This game embodies something that I'd love to see from an actual Jurassic Park game, but sadly I've never actually seen Jurassic Park done. And I predict I'll never see a Jurassic Park game that ever lives up or even comes close to what embodies the Dino Crisis series. You're fighting T-Rexes, you're fighting Velociraptors, you're running around doing ammo collection. The game has a good plot. There's horror and suspense in the game. You look at the game today, and very much like Resident Evil 2 and Resident Evil 3, in the year 2000, these were some of the best polygon characters and graphics we had seen up to that date. But sadly, in the year 2017, this game's controls and the way it looks do not hold up. And it sucks because these games are really good. I won't go as far to say Dino Crisis 2 is unplayable, but I will go as far to say is it needs a major overhaul, and as you've progressed as a gamer, you'll find that these games work more against you than when they did, back 10, 15 years ago. Number 3 on the list, Star Wars Rogue Squadron. Star Wars Rogue Squadron is by far my favorite Star Wars game that I ever owned in my entire life. And I've played almost every Star Wars game that's come out. That's Shadow of the Empire. That's the Masters of whatever, the Star Wars fighting game that was on PlayStation 1. Ooh, that would be a good one too. I'm just going to set that to the side. Honorable mention. But of all the games, this is the game that gives you, the player, the actual ability to sit in the cockpit of every vehicle that you've ever wanted to fly in the Star Wars universe, taking special units to go destroy Empire camps, and it all ties in with the mythology and the storyline of the first Star Wars films. Well, episodes 4 through 6. The game is still playable today, but you can tell how much it's aged if you try to plug the game in now and try to go forth and play. The controls are not the best, especially when you're trying to tie up an AT-AT's feet and your X-Wing or whatever ship you're using keeps crashing into objects that look farther than they appear. It just makes the game unplayable in certain parts, and you get frustrated. I am getting frustrated now a lot more than I was as a kid, and that's because as you grow up and you learn that games aren't as good as you remember, you're able to judge these things on a more harsh level and more real standard. Don't get me wrong, I love Star Wars Rogue Squadron, that's why it's on this list, but that game definitely needs to be overhauled. Can you imagine if we got Star Wars Rogue Squadron completely rebuilt and put on the PlayStation 4 or the Xbox One today? People would buy it in an instant because we don't have games like that right now. The Star Wars games right now that you have for modern video games are just not holding up. You can tell they're just not holding up today. People want a Star Wars game where they can just fly the ships and destroy other ships, destroy bases, go on missions, have an actual campaign tied to their game and not rely on multiplayer. Now, if they came out with Rogue Squadron today and incorporated a co-op instead of just strictly multiplayer, incorporated co-op, now that we have this vast online network that we didn't have in the mid-90s, that is what you need to do to make this game. Number 2 on the list, Turok 2, The Seeds of Evil. Turok 2, Seeds of Evil was one of my favorite games on the Nintendo 64. The Turok story in itself is a very complex story. There's this alien trying to take over the world while creating this dinosaur army and time paradoxes, as well as incorporating old world with high tech. I mean, Turok himself is a Native American who looks like he's straight out of like the 18th century. But he's using guns like the cerebral boar that looks like it's something straight out of the Phantasm series. Turok 2 needs to be overhauled to make it even playable at this point. If you plug in Turok 2 on your Nintendo 64 today and try to go forth, I guarantee you, I was able to play for about 2 hours without quitting in frustration just because the controls work against you the entire time. I can set aside that the game looks dated, even though I would love to see it brought forward to this generation of consoles. The controls work against you the entire game. First of all, they made the game completely inverted without the capability of switching, which screws the majority of anyone that plays console games in itself. The aiming options are completely clunky. You have auto aim and free aim. If you're looking around with the inverted controls, your character Turok is trying to always go to the center of the screen if you're not slightly holding the joystick at a certain angle and a certain... If you push even too hard, he'll look straight up or straight down. There's no way to fix it, so the game works against you, and I found myself getting killed more times than not just because the controls and the handling of your character suck so bad. Now, back when this game came out, you didn't complain about these things because you're just engulfed in the gore and the story and the dinosaurs, and you think everything is good. No. Now, number 1 on the list is gonna be, kind of a cookie cutter answer because I think the game really needs it. Now, it was just declared that we're not gonna get the 3rd one, and it really sucks because we waited over 10 years at this point for something that was promised by Valve. That is Half-Life 2.
Rise and shine, Mr. Freeman. Rise and shine. The right man in the wrong place can make all the difference in the world. So wake up, Mr. Freeman. Wake up and smell the ashes.
Now, I think Half-Life 1 and 2 should be brought back and redone, rebuilt from the ground up to be working on this generation consoles. Not a port, don't get me wrong, Some people might be thinking I'm talking about a port. No, I think these games need to be built from the ground up to be on these consoles of this generation. Could you imagine how Half-Life, well, I'm sure the PC community can, because they can do whatever they want. But on this generation console, can you imagine how good Half-Life 1 and 2 would look? Especially Half-Life 2. It's been known as one of the greatest sci-fi first-person action shooter suspenseful / horror games ever made. It holds a legendary standard for a reason. The story of Half-Life is incredible. And the sad thing is, because 3's never coming out, this is the only thing that I would, for a gamer, for someone who's played Half-Life 2 now for, I don't know, a decade, would love to see this game just be re-released. Rebuilt from the ground up, I would buy it. The game needs it. I played Half-Life 2 the other day on the orange box on my Xbox 360, and I was just thinking that, man, this is another game that I love, and why am I not getting as much joy out of it as I did 10 years ago? Oh, maybe because of how the game looks and plays compared to modern games of today. So that's just my top 5 list of games that I would like to see rebuilt from the ground up, just to, you know, push them into the future. There are so many of these games that kids nowadays are never gonna have the fun or, you know, time to be able to experience. Turok 2, you don't hear anybody talking about the Turok series anymore. Dino Crisis is a legend game from Capcom that no one ever talks about that I see. Everyone always talks about Resident Evil. Everyone always talks about Castlevania. Everyone always talks about, you know, Duke Nukem, but you never hear about a lot of the obscure games that were also really good. Duke Nukem we've already seen brought back, and what Gearbox did to it was completely unacceptable. I just wish Duke the best now, and I want him just to be laid to rest in reality. Anyway guys, I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, hit the like button, and I'll see you on the next game review. Have a good night.